That offer depends on Ottawa sticking to its plan to buy Lockheed's F-35 fighter jets. So last week, Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a review of Canada's contract to buy 88 F-35 fighter jets.
In a trade fight with Donald Trump, you may have heard that the Carney government is reconsidering its multi-billion-dollar purchase of American F-35 fighter jets.
Interchangeability and joint. Those words are all there in describing exactly how the F-35, an international plane that Canada bought in from the beginning.
Most people assume fighter jet purchases are decided by spreadsheets, threat assessments, and technical evaluations. That alliances make these choices calmly, collectively, and without pressure. That when a country signs a contract for a combat aircraft, it does so freely, based on what best serves its defense needs. That assumption feels reasonable. It is also incomplete. In recent years, Canada's decision to buy the F-35 has often been framed as inevitable, a natural extension of NORAD cooperation, a requirement for interoperability with the United States, a step Canada had no real choice but to take. The F-35, after all, is marketed not just as an aircraft, but as the backbone of Western air power for decades to come. Against that narrative, alternatives were dismissed quietly, sometimes politely, sometimes outright. But beneath the surface of this consensus, another dynamic has been at work. One that has less to do with stealth coatings or sensor fusion, and more to do with leverage, dependency, and consequences. To understand that dynamic, it helps to look at how Canada arrived here. Ottawa committed to purchasing 88 F-35A fighters from Lockheed Martin, a deal valued in the tens of billions once lifetime costs are included. The aircraft promised fifth-generation capabilities, deep integration with U.S. forces, and seamless participation in American-led operations. For years, this was presented as the only serious option. Other aircraft were evaluated, but the outcome appeared predetermined. At the same time, the geopolitical context around Canada's defense relationship with the United States was changing. Trade disputes escalated. Tariffs were threatened.
The cabinet's now saying that we're at war with America. That doesn't help. Okay? That doesn't... an American opinion. Okay? Maybe in Canada saying we're at war, maybe that's something that Canadians stand up and say, yes, 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 okay? We have an enemy. I don't think so. I know a little bit about Canada. No, we're not at war. If the president thought he was at war with Canada, you'd see a whole different kind of relationship in trade negotiations.
Political rhetoric hardened. The idea that economic and military cooperation were insulated from one another began to look less certain. It was within this atmosphere that Canada's F-35 decision stopped looking purely technical and started to look strategic in a different way. The moment that sharpened this shift did not come from a press release or a formal briefing. It came in the form of a warning. Public, measured, but unmistakable. Peter Hoekstra, the United States ambassador to Canada, stated that walking away from the F-35 could put NORAD cooperation at risk. The phrasing was careful. There was no explicit threat, no list of penalties, but the implication was clear enough to register in Ottawa and beyond. This was not simply about aircraft performance. It was about alignment, about expectations, about what happens when a close ally considers stepping outside a framework designed and controlled elsewhere. For decades, NORAD has been the centerpiece of North American air defense. Its effectiveness depends on shared data, integrated command structures, and political trust. By linking Canada's fighter choice to NORAD's future, the conversation moved into a different category. The decision was no longer framed as what aircraft best suits Canada's needs, but as what choice maintains favor and avoids friction. Why did that matter so much? Because alternatives existed, and they challenged more than just Lockheed Martin's market share. Sweden's Saab Gripen had been offered with an unusual proposal. Not simply aircraft deliveries, but full industrial participation. A domestic production line. Technology transfer. Access to source code. Control over upgrades and integration. In practical terms, it meant Canada could operate, modify, and sustain its fleet without seeking external permission. Supply chains would be local. Sovereignty would be tangible. From a purely military perspective, the Gripen had already demonstrated NATO interoperability, rapid integration, and operational reliability in alliance missions. From a political and economic perspective, it represented something rarer, a reduction in dependency. That reduction carried implications far beyond fighter performance. Control over software defines how an aircraft can be used, where it can be deployed, and under what circumstances. Control over maintenance schedules defines readiness. Control over upgrades defines relevance over time. In systems as complex as modern fighters, ownership without control can quickly resemble leasing. This is where the warning took on its deeper meaning. If access to alliance structures depends on buying a specific platform from a specific supplier, then procurement choices become instruments of policy. Not just defense policy, but industrial and diplomatic policy as well. Supporters of the F-35 argue that this integration is precisely the point, that shared systems enhance collective security, that divergence weakens deterrence. These arguments are not without merit, but they rest on an assumption of symmetry, that all partners have equal influence over the system they buy into. In practice, that symmetry is uneven. Canada would not own the F-35 software. It would not independently authorize modifications. It would not fully control sustainment costs. These are not flaws unique to the F-35. They are features of a centralized model, a model that works best when the strategic priorities of all participants align perfectly. History suggests they rarely do. The economic dimension reinforces this tension. Operating costs for the F-35 remain significantly higher than many fourth-generation alternatives. Even optimistic projections place its cost per flight hour well above aircraft like the Gripen. Higher costs translate into fewer flight hours, lower pilot proficiency over time, and reduced availability during prolonged operations. In peacetime, that strains budgets. In crisis, it limits options. When Canada considered alternatives, it was not signaling a retreat from the alliance. It was signaling a desire for balance. For a capability that met NORAD requirements without binding every future decision to external approval. That signal was met not with technical rebuttal, but with political caution. The pressure did not stop at words. Trade relations provided additional context. Tariff threats against Canada's aerospace sector underscored how interconnected defense and economics had become. The message, again, was indirect but legible. Choices have consequences. Inside Canada, the debate reflected this complexity. Former Royal Canadian Air Force leaders, defense analysts, and policymakers disagreed sharply. Some emphasized interoperability above all else. Others stressed sovereignty, resilience, and long-term sustainability. Few denied the quality of the F-35 as an aircraft. The disagreement centered on what came attached to it. The broader implication extended beyond Canada. Smaller and mid-sized allies watched closely. If even a country as integrated into U.S. defense structures as Canada faced pressure for exploring alternatives, what did that say about freedom of choice elsewhere? What did it mean for future procurement decisions across NATO? None of this suggested an imminent rupture. NORAD did not collapse. The alliance did not fracture. But a line had been drawn more clearly than before. Fighter jets were no longer just tools of defense. They were instruments of alignment. As Canada continues to navigate this decision, the question is not whether the F-35 is capable. It is whether capability alone defines security, or whether control, flexibility, and independence matter just as much in an uncertain world. Warnings do not need to be loud to be effective. Sometimes, the most powerful ones are delivered calmly, by diplomats, in language that sounds reasonable. They linger not because of what they say outright, but because of what they imply. And once that implication is understood, it becomes difficult to unsee.